Hello? Okay, excellent. Thank you for coming to this presentation. My name is Jeremy Adler, and I work as a sales engineer for GeneXus USA. Our presentation today is going to be about making applications for different platforms, making it for iOS and Android. That's what we'll focus on, but what we talk about can apply to really any different platform. And talking about what we call a native user experience, how to make that feel right for the phone. So we'll get into that in a second, but I want to start by having everyone start thinking now about what's the purpose of a mobile app. What is the underlying purpose of a mobile application? It's a very big question, but just start thinking right now. So today we'll go quickly over who GeneXus USA is and what we do, the mobile market as it currently stands and why it forces us to be multi-platform, how to create a native user experience, and then specific issues that we run into. Like I said, we will just be going over Android and iOS, but I'll guarantee that in 1 year we can make the same presentation and Windows Phone will have to be in there. And if we have time, we will have some questions. So when we found out that we could do a presentation at the conference, we immediately knew what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about multi-platform mobile applications, because that is what we do. GeneXus USA, we make mobile apps for all kinds of companies. Small companies, big companies, universities, government. Really, it runs the board. So we make all of these apps. About 65% of our development is all mobile applications, but 100% of that mobile development is multi-platform. The market really is such that you have to be on all platforms. So that's who we are. I'll show you one example. This is what we call the Maven app. This was created for Parsons Brinckerhoff, which is one of the largest construction companies in the world. They were working in Atlanta, Georgia on transportation projects. So they were fixing highways, adding new subway tunnels, things like that. And they needed a way to get that information to all the citizens in that city and to get feedback from all of the citizens in that city. Now, they had to get to everyone, so they needed to be on all platforms. So we made them an app for iPhone, iPad, Android, and BlackBerry. And you can see, while everything sort of looks the same, it has the same branding, they all have different fields. You can see the iPhone app on the left, the iPad app in the middle, and the Android app on the right, all specific to their platform. So that's who we are and that's what we do, and that's why I'm excited to be able to talk about multi-platform apps today. So let's think about the mobile market for a second. And now, way back when we were on the first iPhone and first Google phone, multi-platform was very different. First, if you were going to go to both platforms, you had a much easier time. While Apple has always had very strict guidelines for what they want on their platforms, Android didn't back then. Back then, you could take one user experience and just put it on both. No one would notice. It would be great. Apps were new. Everyone was excited. Everyone's still excited, but for different reasons. So it was much easier. But today, it's very different. So what does the landscape look like today? Why is all of our mobile development multi-platform? So in the United States, there are 110 million smartphone subscribers. Now, this number is from August of this year, so it might be more because now the iPhone 5 is out. So it might have changed. So it doesn't matter what your app is. If it's business, if it's consumer, that's a third of the United States population you have to be in that market. It's not a question. You just have to be there. And, all right, so how do you have to be there? This is the current breakdown, or this is actually from July. So, again, since the iPhone 5 came out, iOS is probably a little bit bigger. But iOS and Android have such a dominant market share. Both of them have such a large share. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. So that number means you have to have a mobile app, and this means that it has to be multi-platform. This is the world we live in. So I know I asked you before, what's the purpose of a mobile app? Why do we make them? But what's their purpose? So I might make it to sell my app. I can sell it at $1 a piece, and if I sell 1 million apps, I have $1 million. Or I have 700,000 because Apple takes 300,000. That's okay. It might be for marketing. You might need to get your brand out to different people. And the best way is to get it to those 110 million people that have their smartphone on them 24 hours a day. It might be to sell your services. Maybe you sell your services right from your phone. You have a store, you can buy things right on the phone. Maybe it's not even to sell your services on the app. Maybe it's just to give access to your services. A lot of banks in America have the app where you take a picture of your check and it deposits for you. I'm sure that's really everywhere now. So you're not selling them anything new, but you're giving them access. Or maybe it's to collect data. Now, that's similar to the Maven app that I showed you. They needed to collect data from that city to see where people wanted different projects. So what's the underlying purpose of all of this? It's for people to use your app. People have to use it for it to work. Let's go back. Here, if you're selling apps, people certainly have to use it, so they will buy it. If you're marketing and creating brand awareness, that only works if people are actively using your app. If you're selling services, giving access to services, or collecting data, these all rely on people using the application. So this is important because while we talked about being on different platforms and that being necessary, the fact that you have to use it, that makes the native user experience necessary as well. So what do we mean by native user experience? We know a native application, because that's what GeneXus makes. We have our native code. It's right for the phone. It's faster because it's right on there. It's part of it. So that's what you need your applications to be as well. Your application has to feel like most other applications on that phone. It has to feel like the operating system on that phone. If I have an iPhone now, but I used to have an Android phone, and if I looked through my phone and I saw an application with a back button on an Android phone, it takes me out of my experience. It makes me not like that app as much. Now, it's all very psychological, and it's not necessarily blatant. I might not see it and say, oh, I don't like this app. But I won't use it as much. And over time, that's what's going to happen. So the differences that we'll go through today, I'll start with basic user experience considerations, things you might have already heard. We'll go into screen sizes and screen orientations, a very key part, and it's getting more important now with even the iPhone 5 has a bigger screen. Screen sizes are changing. We'll go into tabs and layouts and how those act differently on both platforms. And we'll finish with what ties it all together with making sure that you've branded everything correctly. And that's the real key piece. When, at the end of the day, you've made them for individual platforms, people still need to know that it's your app, that it's one system. Now, as we go through, I want you to think about two things. One is that Android and iOS have a lot of things that are very similar. A lot of things that good user experience on iOS is good user experience on Android. So we'll go over those as well as things that are different. I also want you to remember that the key to user experience is really constantly looking at it, constantly updating it. You can't make your application, put it out, and be done with it. You have to revisit it. Android and iOS get updated. User interface guidelines get updated. And you don't want to fall behind the times because then people won't use the app. So let's start with basic user experience considerations. And for this, which is something I'm sure everyone in this room knows, there's a back button on Android phones, and there isn't one on iPhones. So the iPhone has to have a back button built into the app. Android cannot have that. But the other difference here is also on this older Android phone, we have a menu button. This is going to change, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, how we place actions on the screen. Newer Android phones don't have that button, and there are different ways that you should place your actions. But for this, so here we have Twitter. For most of the presentation, iOS will be on the left and Android on the right. We can see Twitter app. You can tell it's the Twitter app. It has their colors. They both feel it's very good branding, but iOS app has a back button, Android does not. Similarly, this is the Pandora app. They're maybe a little bit more hip than Twitter, I don't know. So their back button is just an arrow. That back button has to be there, but it can be whatever you choose. Let's talk about action bars. Now, most of the key things that are going to happen in an app, things that are going to happen over and again, happen on action bars. In general, and this is an area that's changing rather quickly, in general, if you're going to do something on the top action bar for iOS, because both can have one on the top and the bottom, if you're going to do something on the top, it needs to be almost navigational. It needs to be really key to the core functions of the app. So here, if I'm going to delete something, or if I'm going to edit something, that's what can go on the top bar. You're not going to put, I don't know, any old, I want to go to favorites, something like that. I want to share this with friends. It doesn't necessarily warrant being on the top bar, obviously, depending on which app. And you can see Android over here, we have the share button. We have an add button. It's similar that it's for the whole app. It's not going to change screen to screen. But there you have more flexibility. You can put different things on there. So we'll start seeing a theme, iOS being more stringent and Android being more lenient. You can play around with it more. This is the Gmail app for both platforms. And here you can see iOS on the bottom. We get a little action bar. And this is actually contextual. This is because we've selected 2 emails. Now we get a set of functions that we can do with those emails. We can delete them. We can move them. And it's a similar situation over here for Android, but this one we're going to be able to see that screen all the time. Android here we can play around. It's not necessarily our multiple select screen, but we can always have this bottom bar. So you can play around with that as well. Things where it's going to appear because of what's actually on the screen or actions that you're performing on the screen. But in Android, the bottom bar is the most common. Now, we'll talk about this in a second, but this is a kind of a more button. This is basically the evolution of the menu button on the Android phone. So now if we have actions, we can hide them under that button. In iOS, we're starting to see, and we'll go into the Facebook app in a little bit, but starting to see more of that. Getting a settings or a navigation menu from a menu up top. This is where things are very much in flux, where we are getting actions that are hidden. So we can leave more room on the screen for an app, and we can hide actions under different buttons. You just have to make sure that you're conforming to each actual platform. And so here's an example of a newer Android phone and an older Android phone running different Android operating systems and the difference you're going to get. So on the left, you can see all of our actions are hidden under that menu button. That only comes up when you hit the menu button. And on the right, those actions are always there. If we want to get to more things, we're going to go to our 3 dots. We're going to get our overflow menu. So that's now something to consider even within the platform. Luckily, most of this is handled in the smart device generator. So just make sure that you're planning this as you go. So those are a few basic things, general how we use our app. Now let's talk about screen sizes. The first one, obviously, is a difference between phones and tablets. Android has even more of a problem here because Android can have any number of screen sizes. iOS is more defined, but look at the iPhone 5. We now have a new screen size. So this is the Gmail app on the iPhone and the iPad. Here we have a lot more space, so we need to use it. This is something that's going to be true of Android and of iOS. So here we can see our email, and we click through, we'll get to that email. But here we have more room, so we can see our emails and navigate at the same time. It's similar for the Android app. While these two feel very different, these two have very different experiences. Android's very flat, iOS is very rounded. It's still the same principle. We can navigate, and we can see information at the same time. A very good use of this is the OpenTable application. OpenTable lets you find a restaurant and reserve a table right from the app. So if you're running late and you promised your girlfriend that you would take her out to dinner and you forgot, you can quickly find a place. Might have happened to me before. So here, the user experience for the phone application, you look for restaurants. You can search by where they are. You click into a restaurant. You read about it. And then on the next screen, you can see if they have times, and you can click through. Now, OpenTable has done a fantastic job of creating their tablet app. Because here I can see where it is. I can see, different information about it, different reviews, and I can order it right here. I can reserve my table. So it's combined all of my user experience into one screen. It's very clever. All right, so we have a new iPhone screen. iOS developers have thought forever only on one screen. It's so much easier. It definitely got Retina screen, and that has to be dealt with if you're working with older iPhones. But it was always one size. So now there's an issue. And this next slide is fake, I'm warning you, and it's just a rumor. But we could end up with the iPhone mini. It's probably going to happen. So changing screen sizes is just a reality. Now, I have the iPhone 5, and this has started to happen more and more. All right? I've got a great app here. It lets me find food and order it. But do you see what's wrong here? They didn't change the size. So they didn't plan ahead for the screen size change. They didn't change it once the phone came out. And now I get taken out of my experience because they're bars on my screen. So an example, this is one of our applications, and it transitions nicely. We even have more room now we can add to our dashboard. So tabs and layouts. Here, they operate differently on both platforms, and the reason you want to use tabs in the first place is to create a very horizontal structure, to create something where you can get to a lot of information very quickly. The opposite is a very vertical structure, something where you have to go down into the app, and then you have to go back out to get to something else. And we'll see the benefits of both. So start with the Netflix application. You can see, and the standard here for Android is tabs on the top. Tabs always on the top. This is very easy and something people get wrong a lot. And it lets us go through all of our movies, our favorites, things like that. And we can go through. It's very easy to get to everything in the app. The trade-off here is that we have a lot of overhead. We have something that's always on the screen. We're losing screen space. So you really want to make sure that your app needs that structure, needs those tabs, needs that horizontal layout. This is the Starbucks application. So here, the same idea. Our Android is nice and flat, has the tabs on the top. iOS rounded and tabs on the bottom. This is the PayPal app. The iOS app is tabs. That feels natural. And the Android is a grid. Now, it used to be that you made tabs for Android. You made tabs for iOS, and you made a grid for Android. It was decently platform specific. It was kind of a platform default. Excuse me. So this is changing more and more, and a lot of people still stick to this, but really it's now more application dependent. Personally, I think this app is small enough that a grid works better, but you also have to weigh that against the fact that most iOS apps are going to have tabs. So maybe it's a better user experience that way. Here, I want to send money. On the iOS, I just go to the Send tab. Here, I click into the Send button, and it takes me to that page. This is the TED Talks app. This one has a lot of structure. It has 2 sets of tabs for iOS on the bottom and the top, and just 2 sets on the top for Android. So that's very horizontal. That really lets you get to a lot of information very quickly. But it's a lot. It's a lot that's always on the screen. It's kind of like a lot of management, and anyone who's worked in a company knows it can get interesting. So it's a good way for this application because it's a lot of data, but it's something that can get to be a burden. Some new things that we're seeing. You can see with newer Android versions, you can have a drop-down menu come right from the top action bar, and that's fantastic. Here, the New York Times application, we can see all our different sections. We can navigate that way, and we can even go to blogs that has a tab within the menu. This is the new Facebook app. So here we get our menu button that brings in navigation. Hiding navigation from the screen and not making it ever present, it's a very new thing, but it's very good user experience. I don't always need to see all that information on the screen, but I know if I need it, it's right there. Now, this app came in very handy last night at the dinner. We had to check the score of the American football game last night. And luckily, Chicago won. But ESPN has a ton of sports. They have a lot of things that you need to deal with. Sorry. So for ESPN, here it's a very horizontal layout. their entire application is a paged grid. We can just scroll through all of our sports, get all of our information very quickly. It's just very unique, works very well for them. Orientation. This BBC app, when I move my phone, I get a new view. That's expected. That should be something that's built in. Android, iOS, it doesn't matter. Tablet, phone, it should change. There are very few instances where it shouldn't, or where you should lock someone into a view. So what brings it all together? Let's talk about branding. Now, when I think about branding, I think McDonald's, right? It's all over the world. Everyone knows what it is. And they're very on top of their image. But their app is terrible. So let's see. We have a back button on our Android app. And this is definitely, we're pretty sure, an HTML5 app. Doesn't look very good. Going to give it a big red X. Another example, this is Instagram's app. Now, Instagram, it's a great company. Everyone loves it. But they've just taken their iOS app and moved it to Android without considering that Android needs the tabs on the top. Also an X. So let's look at some good examples. Here's FedEx. All the colors are similar. The look is similar, but it's very specific to the platform. iOS has tabs. It's very rounded. Android does not. It has tabs on top, and it's got our menu button on top. Sorry, that was a terrible idea. But we can tell it's the same app. We can tell it's the same brand. Here we have Walmart. It's similar. Our Android app scrolls. That's it. We just get one long list of menu. But in our iOS app, we have tabs. But it's the same colors. It's the same feel. It's the same branding. That's the key. Same as with Bank of America. Different tabs, different feel, but it's the brand. And we're going to finish on this Shazam app. And, it lets you, we can hear that song and we can tell what it is. iOS, they've fully dedicated themselves into iOS. They have very rounded icon. They've built themselves into the tab bar. It's great. And you can tell it's Shazam. It's their colors. It's everything. They've also really dedicated themselves to Android. Everything's very flat. It's a different logo from one to the other. Everything's flat. Tabs are on top. Everything looks like an Android phone. This is really what you want to aim for. Here, they've developed for both platforms, both spreading their brand, both increasing awareness. That's excellent. So just to review, their basic considerations. We have screen size issues. You need to choose a layout, one that works for the platform. But through the whole thing, you need to brand it. You need to bring it together with your brand. Now, we're not specially gifted or anything like that. All of this is very useful and very easy to find and follow in the developer guidelines for both Android and iOS. And they change constantly. So that's a horrible long link, but the slides will be available. And that's all we have for you today. Just the one thing to focus on is that you want people to use your apps. So native user experience. Thank you.